Hey guys, welcome back to the It's Too Wonderful podcast. Happy Wednesday. We have a lot of fun things to talk about today. Specifically, Ashlynn, I've always looked up to the way you pursue your studies, like in light of your faith and just the really unique way that you intertwine.
Yeah.
Thank you. Intertwine those things, like especially biology and science and faith it's like oil and water sometimes.
They hate each other.
They don't
need to. They don't need to hate each other. They blend really well, but people are imperfect, and specific people, some people say that like the biggest opinions you hear are like the people who scream the loudest or something like that, but that's not always the correct opinion, and that's not always the best one to have. But I think if you talk about science and about faith at all, you'll hear like two really controversial opinions or two opinions that cause a lot of discourse and division. Like you will literally hear someone say that like faith is an illusion. You know, there's a very famous scientist who is coming to Vanderbilt next summer who literally said that faith is an illusion. God is an illusion. Yeah. If you believe in God, you're delusional. Like it's the biggest delusion. But then you hear, Christians sometimes will be like, if you believe in science, like you can't believe in God. You can't be a Christian. And it's very confusing for someone who's a Christian and a scientist.
Wow.
But yeah, they can blend. They do for a lot of people. But I think when you hear those really loud voices, it's really easy to feel a lot of fear and kind of want to stay away from like either topic or just like pick one and kind of stick with it, you know?
Yeah. That's good. That was a little teaser. We're going to get back to that. Speaking of loud voices, I feel like I need to share. I just had a crazy day. Like I worked all day and then went straight to therapy, and I'm just on this high from like this breakthrough I had in therapy, and I'm not going to share everything, but I do want to share that there is more freedom than you know in life with Jesus. And I personally am someone who I kind of idolize grief and suffering as like, okay, come with me. I know we're like going on a little tangent, but
this is how therapy works. Just step into your therapy session for a little bit.
Oh, step into my therapy session. That's crazy. I trust you guys. But yeah, so we were talking, well, basically I see grief and suffering as like as like making me more holy, because I'm like feeling these really hard things that are like drawing me closer to the Lord. And in the Bible, it talks a lot about like how you will suffer if you're a Christian and all of this stuff. And sometimes I like tout around these feelings as a trophy, as like, oh, like look at me, I'm a really good Christian because I'm suffering. Or I strive in my suffering as like I like look for something to grieve, or I look for something to prove that my suffering is legitimate and real. Anyways, I was realizing all of these things and also viewing my joy, and I'm a person that holds a lot of joy. And I was just talking in therapy about like some things that are happening in my life and things that are objectively kind of hard. And my therapist was like giving me a lot of space to feel all the things I needed to feel. And then I kind of just stopped the session and I was like, I'm so tired of telling myself this narrative that my life is so hard and so bad, because honestly, I'm so happy. And I started listing all of these things that I'm happy about and all of these things that bring me so much joy and all of the ways that my life is so good, and choosing that perspective over the one that was like, well, look at all of the ways that I'm suffering and look at all of the ways that I'm holding grief. I had this moment of like, no, I'm going to choose to share the story that is joyful. And at first that felt not as good, or not as holy or not as mature or what's the word? More shallow. And my therapist like got up and she was like, I think you need to sit in my chair. And she literally stood in the corner of the room and I went to sit in her chair and she goes, I want you to talk to the girl that just sat on that couch for 45 minutes. What would you say to her? And I just had like this moment of revelation for myself of like what I thought was grief and suffering was really just worry. It was just worry masquerading. It was myself becoming inflated, my ego becoming inflated. I had so much pride in what I thought was my suffering, but was really just my mind spinning things over to worry about things endlessly. And choosing joy is not the lesser path. It's actually the path that we are able to live in because of the blood of Jesus. Like, that is the freedom of Christ. Joy is always at hand. It's a fruit of the Spirit. It's something we can always tap into. Whether or not our life is good or you feel happy, like, joy is there. And then my therapist started talking about like Inside Out, you know, and like all the little feelings in the control panel. Yes. And the control panel. And I just saw like my joy sitting in a corner, battered and bruised, because she was told like, you shouldn't be at the helm. It's bad if you take control. Oof. And my worry was standing there masquerading as, oh, I'm grief and suffering and I'm the best thing to run this show. When actually like joy is able to. And it is, I just was like laughing the whole way home of like, wow, I can be happy. And that's not a bad thing. And like trusting that the Lord will move my heart to grief in a way that is holy and not in a way that's like prideful and showy. I don't know. I totally just sabotaged your...
Girl, it's fine. Also, like, we talk a lot in therapy about how it's nearly impossible to feel gratitude and also anxiety at the same time. And so...
Whoa.
So in moments where I tend to get really anxious, we talk a lot about finding moments of gratitude when we can. And it obviously it doesn't solve the problem and it doesn't necessarily calm all the anxieties that I feel, but I feel like it, you know, and gratitude and joy are a little bit different, but really being like, wow, I'm thankful for breath today, or I'm thankful that I'm healthy, and I'm thankful that, you know, I'm married to the love of my life, you know, or I'm thankful that I get to work my dream job, or things like that. When I'm thinking about those things, it really like calms the storm of anxiety that I feel and all of the doubts that I have of, you know, am I where I need to be, or am I doing the right thing, or am I good enough, or, you know,
all of these lies that, oh my gosh, I'm just realizing that this theme that is so common of like, am I wasting my time? Am I good enough? Do I have my life figured out? Like, none of it matters.
No.
Which is, I just had this moment of clarity of like, why am I believing that I have to like answer any of these questions when I really can just like sit in the presence of the Lord and like wait for his return and love people. You know, it's just like so much simpler. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like when times are hard, it's really easy. You feel like you're leaning on the Lord more, you know? I mean, the Bible talks about that when you have nothing left, when there's nothing else left and there's only Jesus, that's the only thing you can turn to. And I think in moments of joy, it feels like there's a lot of things that you could turn to, you know? It's not just about Jesus, but it doesn't have to be that way. You know?
You can also have joy in moments where you have nothing else to turn to but Jesus. Like there's joy there too. And I think that's what I thought is like, oh, joy is only reserved for when I'm like relying on all of these things except for Jesus. So I like shouldn't feel joy. I should only feel grief because that means like I'm relying on Jesus.
And you can also grow while being joyful Like, we don't talk about that all the time either. Like,
Whoa.
you can be filled with joy and still lean on the Lord and still grow.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have.
And feel grief.
Yes, absolutely.
Like they're all together.
Yeah.
Wow. Anyways, okay. That was your
10 minutes of therapy.
10 minutes of therapy. But also, like, I just think this is cool because I remember you were kind of the first people that talked to me about therapy and its value. And we're like open about like, hey, I'm gonna do therapy. Like, you signed up for Belmont therapy.
Oh my gosh, my Belmont therapist. I know not everyone had a good experience, but mine was truly the best. Like,
how do you think that, like, looking back on your college experience, how do you think that shifted things?
Ooh, how therapy shifted things for me,
or changed your perspective, or like the way that,
I think ultimately for me, the goal of therapy is awareness. So it isn't necessarily solving all my problems. And I think something that I've known is that I have the tools to solve a lot of things that are going on in my life, but I wasn't necessarily aware of them. And so I have to like think about this. Sorry, I need to drink water.
That's okay. That's a really heavy question. How did therapy shift things?
Well, and I think when you talk about like parts therapy, for example, and learning that, sorry.
No, light bulb.
Every part, if you've watched Inside Out too, you get a little glimpse, but every single part that lives within you is ultimately trying to protect you, even the ones that seem really bad. So, you know, sadness or anger or fear, or, you know, I have a part in me we call it the parent part. It's the one that tries to boss me around and like pull me up by my bootstraps. But those parts are all trying to take care of you, your core self, and they're doing it in the best way that they can. But it's not, you learn those things when you're pretty young, like fear, for example. Like if you learn to be afraid, like, or if you are afraid all the time, right? When you were younger, being afraid probably protected you from harm, right? But as an adult, you don't need to be afraid all the time, you know? And as you have the Lord in your life, you don't need to be fearful all the time. And so I feel like knowing those things and knowing that I don't just like hate myself and the parts of me, they're not like battling. They're battling sort of, but they're trying to protect me and they're trying to love me in the best way that they can. And so, you know, kind of telling my fear, hey, you can sit back there and you can have a little cup of tea and you cannot be at this, what's it called? The control panel. You don't have to run the ship, you know, like you can take a seat. I can run the ship, or Joy can run the ship. You know, we can choose to have someone else run the ship, but I recognize that you're trying to take care of me. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of abstract, but
no, it does make sense. And it's like, I think a really important part of it is so many of us are so, there's all of these like shame cycles. I hate to use all of these like catchphrases of like, we're so hard on ourselves, like all these shame cycles, but it's true. And I think what those things and what therapy shows us is honestly like the power of grace and forgiveness and listening, because like, if you're able to do that to yourself, like how much more are you able to do that for another person? And I think what it really does is it like clears the space and like puts it is putting yourself out of the way so that you can love other people better.
Oh yeah. Therapy has taught me how to be a better friend in so many ways. You know, like when you're not so busy looking within yourself and wondering, oh my gosh, like what's wrong with me or what's going on and why am I feeling this way? It's not selfish, but in a way I feel like when you're constantly trying to analyze your movements and what you're doing and how you're impacting, you're not even looking at the people around you. You're just looking at yourself. And so I feel like even being aware of my tendencies and what I, you know, how I react to things has helped take the focus off of me so that I can really be present in situations. You know, like if you feel really socially anxious, for example, and you go to a group event and you're surrounded by all these people and you are feeling so anxious all the time, you're thinking, oh, did I say something to offend someone? Or, oh, did I do something wrong? Or did I say the wrong thing? Or am I funny enough? Or do I deserve to be here? And all that time you're missing out on such valuable connections that you could be making or ways that you could be loving the people around you too. And so as much as, you know, therapy has helped me grow a lot, I feel like it's also helped me be present for my friends too and my family, you know?
That's so good.
It's
Love
great.
that.
I recommend it.
Yeah. Anyways, shout out to therapy. But I don't know. And I think what's really cool for me is seeing the ways, honestly, kind of how like science, and this is a whole nother conversation, so we're just kind of tapping the toe, but how science and faith can seem like oil and water, so can sometimes like therapy and faith.
Oh, yeah. I mean, at least it appears that way. It's not that way.
It's not, and I think that's the gift of it, is like sitting when my therapist got up and I sat in my therapist's chair and like looked at the couch where I'd been sitting, like I just realized like, oh, this is just all a tool, all a way that I'm just providing a space, a safe room a few times a month where like I can really take the time to look inward. And that's not a selfish thing, because it's like unto loving others better and like knowing God more. And I just think, I mean, sometimes I believe the narrative. Whoa. I believe the narrative that therapy is selfish. And I mean, what you just said, like, proves otherwise, that, like, well, if it's going to help you love other people better,
you know?
Yeah.
And also, like, you know, I just feel like there are so many practices that therapy teaches you, even if you go to a therapist who isn't a Christian, which, you know, is whatever. I think the things that they tell you and the practices that you learn from therapy can be implemented as spiritual practices too, you know, like learning to rest properly and being grateful. I mean, the amount of times I'm told that I need to be more grateful, or I need to practice gratitude more often, or try to incorporate that into my life is astounding. And it's not, I mean,
not always with the lens of faith.
Exactly. But it totally is, you know, instead of just being like, I'm thankful for breath, I can thank God for breath, you know, but there's so many of those things are totally interconnected, which is so cool.
And it all comes from the Lord.
Totally.
You know, like all of this, it's not like we're just like adding God into it to make it like more meaningful.
Gratitude plus God. No, he actually
like,
is the creator of gratitude for sure.
Yeah. And there's just all of the, like the whole, I was just listening to this song earlier about like, something about how like the whole world like yearns for his glory, or like shows his glory, you know, some like all of creation. I'm forgetting the word, but I think you know what I mean. Like in the same way, these really fundamental concepts like aren't these like alternatives to how we're supposed to live, but like point to the way we're supposed to live, you know? So anyways, that's cool. I want to talk about,
sorry, it's not funny. The look you gave me made me laugh. Okay, what is it?
science and faith.
For sure.
For sure.
Where do we begin? I think maybe I should clarify. I'll tell you a bit about myself.
Yeah, no, we should start. We can
do an intro.
Yeah, let's do an intro. How far are we in? We're like 23 minutes in.
Let's
do an intro.
Let's do an intro. I mean, we kind of did an intro.
Yeah.
But this is like an intro to the topic.
Perf.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. My name's Ashlynn. I think we said that already. I am a Christian, as you probably have figured out by now. I'm from Iowa, but I moved to Nashville to go to Belmont. I actually moved from Iowa to go to Vanderbilt, but then I didn't get in for undergrad. And then, I go to Vanderbilt now. I'm getting my PhD in biology. I study antimicrobial resistance and microbiology very broadly. And it's something that I'm very passionate about. I don't know what I want to do yet in the future, but something that I am really passionate about is trying to bridge the gap between scientists and then people who don't typically practice science. Sort of bridging the gap of understanding and of knowledge. Scientists use a lot of jargon and words that are really hard for people to understand. And then if they're not using that, they're saying it in a really stupid way that makes people feel dumb. And that's not helpful either. So passionate about that, bridging the gap between science and faith as well. But yeah.
Love.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. Where do you think that desire like comes from? I'm curious.
Science, like curiosity?
Or like the desire to bridge the gap?
Oh, because I was afraid of it my whole life. Which this was no one's fault in particular, but I grew up really afraid of science because I was so afraid that I would learn something or that I would read something that would alter my view of God or that would make me doubt God. And I was so afraid of doubting God that I tried to avoid controversial topics or even just big topics in science because I thought that if I were to learn something that were to, be opposing what I believed in the Lord and in what I had learned maybe in church, for example, then I would have to choose one, science or faith or, and then I have to give up everything that I'm passionate about. And so I was so afraid. And I honestly even struggled with it until a couple of years ago, until I was in college and I really started to reconcile those things. And so I'm really passionate about it because it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
You don't have to choose. And in fact, it's not this, debate where you pick one side or the other. It's this beautiful thing that goes together so well. And you can 100% be a scientist and also believe in Jesus. Those things are not contradicting.
Yeah.
And I think there's like three camps, right? There's one group of people, as I've, kind of hinted at, who really think that they can't mix oil and water and like, actually not even oil and water, like water and an orange. Like they just they're not even in the same room.
Yeah.
You can only pick one or the other, But then I think there's another camp of people who think that they can exist, and you can believe in both, but you have to completely separate them from your mind. So you can be a Christian and a scientist, but you don't think about God when you're doing science, and you don't think about science when you're at church, for example.
Huh.
But then there's a third camp, which I now fall into, where it's like I totally think that they mix. And there's this huge misunderstanding that I think we see. But I used to be in the first camp where I thought that they couldn't mix at all. And then I was in the camp where I tried to put them together, but they didn't exactly fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think was like the switch that got you from the second camp to the third camp?
Ooh.
And sorry, part two.
Okay.
Do you think that switch... Actually, no. Answer that first and then I'll ask the second question.
Okay. I think there's a couple moments I can remember. One is when I had the realization that God is so much bigger than a discovery that I'm going to make. It kind of hit me where which I can explain this in a little bit, but I sort of realized that I was putting God in the gaps of my knowledge. I'll explain that.
Yeah, you can explain it now.
You want me to explain it now? Yeah. Oh, I'll get into it. So I think the main issue that I've noticed, I'm so sorry if I have like dry mouth right now. I'm just going to put that out there. Anyways.
Do you want some of my water?
No. I have water. Don't worry.
Okay.
I'm just putting it out there for everyone. Things that are awkward, you have to call them out.
So true. I love it.
Anyways. Okay. So when it comes to science, I was a philosophy minor in undergrad as well. And I took a bunch of sociology classes because I was so perplexed by the questions related to science and related to Christianity. And what I found from doing a lot of work and a lot of research is that what typically happens is we as Christians, I can get to scientists later, but we as Christians tend to put God, or we have the tendency to put God in the gaps of our understanding. And this like God of the gaps idea, which actually Francis Collins coined that term. I can't take credit for it. But for example, I'll give a situation. Do you know what the germ theory of disease is?
Sure don't.
Okay. It's not hard, I promise.
Okay.
It's basically the concept that germs cause disease. So for example, if you're like swimming in a pond and you drink E. coli, you probably will start throwing up. You are not going to have a good reaction to that. That's been proved by science. I genuinely study that. Not quite, but sort of. And so let's say this was hundreds of years ago and you lived in some sort of community and you had the traditional belief that if, you got sick, it was because God was mad at you, which is a little bit prosperity gospel. Let's start there. But you might have the idea that, oh, if I'm throwing up, like if I'm sick, I don't know why. It must be because God's mad at me. It must be because I've sinned against God. It must be because I've committed some crime or I've done something. And your community looks at you in that same way of, well, you're sick with a mysterious illness that we don't understand. You must be, sinning. This is God. God did this to you. And then let's say, some scientists come out and they're like, no, that's not what's happening. I mean, you're getting sick, but it's because you're drinking water that is contaminated with bacteria that is harmful for you. And so if you, as a person who's believed your whole life that God is doing that to you, you have one of two options. You can either, believe that God is still doing this to me. You are lying. Science is lying. Science is wrong, which that puts you into a whole heap of trouble, obviously. And then there's the other route where you could say, yeah, I guess that's true. I guess God isn't doing this to me, but it shakes up your entire view of God. And it changes it could change your whole perspective on everything. Well, maybe God isn't upset with me all the time, or is he really real? Like, how does he work then? Does he work in other ways? And obviously that's kind of a random example, but I think even now, like, we put God in these gaps where we'll see something in science, even like, why does the sunset happen? Why do flowers bloom? Things like that, which can easily be explained by scientific processes. I think it's so easy to just be like, God totally did that, which absolutely, is God our ultimate creator? Yes. Does he have a hand in everything? Sure. But when we have this firm belief that it's God and that's it, the moment that we learn something that challenges that view, it causes panic. And it caused panic for me because I remember thinking, oh gosh, like if I find out that this thing is not, just some crazy process that God is doing, then God might not be real, which is not true. And so I feel like that causes so much fear behind discovery and behind learning. But I think it also kind of devalues God in a way where if you're like, God, you only work in the things that I don't understand, that's kind of sad. And that's also kind of putting God in a box in kind of his own way of saying, God, like, if you're going to, I don't understand this. So like, it was just you. I mean, of course, this is a very nuanced thing. And also I want to clarify, you can totally disagree with me.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is acquiring knowledge, like not acquiring knowledge to like fire against God is like, oh, well, now I know. So I don't have to believe in you anymore.
Yeah, it sounds crazy, but it happens so often.
Well, what that does is it completely breaks down people who have chosen to believe as an antidote for not knowing a lot. About how the world works,
which is totally fine. I don't expect every person to know.
I don't know any of that stuff,
but that's okay.
I am that girl that's like, God, like literally, I am that girl.
I think there's a beauty in trusting in God, and I don't want to say that like you can't do that. You absolutely can be like, wow. And like I said, there's a huge difference between, only putting God in gaps of understanding and also just appreciating creation. Like I can look at the sky and say like, wow, look at the sky that God painted. Do I mean that he literally painted it with his, not really, but like, I can still be in awe of that and be in awe of our creator.
Whoa. Okay. So what did it look like for you to like start to learn these things and then be like, okay, wait, but I can still believe in God?
Honestly, I feel like it just opened up. It made me feel so much better. Like
really?
I spent so much of my energy worrying and trying to like navigate that space, which sounds crazy, but really it's something I've dealt with my entire life. And having the freedom, it also like, it's kind of foolish, but like, I totally was like, man, I'm going to discover something that people don't know and it's going to disprove God. I didn't think that for sure, but that was like my underlying fear.
You were afraid of yourself.
I was afraid of myself.
That you would disprove the Lord.
Which was totally like discrediting God. I know. And so, and like, also I think there's also a lot of fear of, because science is not necessarily smiled upon by a lot of people who are following Jesus, not in like a hateful way necessarily, but just it's kind of scary for them too. I think I was really afraid of like the disapproval of people around me. Like I remember starting college and telling people I was a biology major and they were like, oh, we'll be praying for you. That's going to be really hard. And I was like, what's going to be really hard?
Oh, wow.
Organic chemistry? It is really hard. It is really hard. But I don't know. I was so afraid of kind of the judgment of others too.
Yeah.
Because I think also another thing that people talk about a lot is I think science is effectively rooted in evidence and collecting evidence and making hypotheses based on the evidence that we build or, find. And so a lot of times, for example, the theory of gravity is exactly that. Now, we know that don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to tell you that gravity is not real or that like the sun isn't the center of our solar system, but it's like we only know that because of all of the evidence that we've gathered. When you drop something, it falls to the ground every single time, over and over again. And that's what science is. It's not, necessarily, I'm just making up this random idea. It just came out of nowhere. And whereas, belief in God, it absolutely can be based on experiences that you've had and moments that you've, been in. But it also is faith. It's a step of faith, which is entirely different than what science is, And I don't even know where I was going with that, but I think that distinction was also really helpful for me too. As a scientist, I'm not seeking to disprove God. I'm not seeking to tell people that God isn't real. Of course not, because I believe that he's real.
Yeah.
I made a choice. I made a step of faith into following Jesus. Whereas with science, I'm just collecting evidence and I'm presenting what I found.
How does that change the way that you view how the Lord works in creation?
Well, the thing is I just deeply admire it so much more. I think I had a fear that like, because I understand like the nitrogen cycle and like, like how, what am I even saying? Because I know like, for example, I know that there's bacteria on our skin, right? Do I understand? Like, yeah, I know what's there and I think that's really cool, but that like excites me. And that's like, wow, like how amazing is that? It just, I think maybe I do see things a little bit more logically, but that doesn't prevent me from still being in awe.
Yeah.
Thank you. But it's true. Like, just because I understand, I don't really, but just because I kind of understand the concept of how a sunset works, that doesn't mean that I don't find it beautiful. And just because, understanding doesn't make you less appreciative. It doesn't make you have less faith. In fact, it's like, how cool is that? How beautiful is it that the Lord gave me that desire to want to, of this like curiosity of wanting to learn how the world works.
Wow.
And that knowledge also saves lives.
Yeah.
I mean, how beautiful is it that we've discovered and we've been able to utilize bacteria and the things that they express in the ground to treat people with bacterial infections so that they don't die from an ear infection. That's so cool. And like, how amazing is it that the Lord gave us those things and that he created the world in such a way that we were able to discover that? I mean, that is just absolutely mind-boggling to me.
And there's no fear in discovery.
No,
like I just keep thinking, well, and like hearing you say, like, I was afraid to understand things because like, then it felt like there was no room for the Lord kind of, right?
Yeah.
Essentially.
It just was almost like I was discovering something new or God, which it sounds ridiculous, but it was a real fear. And I think it is a real fear for people. Like, it's tough.
I don't know. I just keep thinking of like, these little stones and you're like stacking them and one person who's maybe like not as logical and so okay, for example, there's me and you, right? And when it comes to like this specific area of science, my stack is a lot shorter than yours
which is fine.
Right. Well, because I just don't know a lot about science, and in other areas my stack is probably a lot higher than yours.
Totally.
But in this one, my stack is lower. I don't, in the sense of like, I don't know how a sunset works or all of these things. And you have all of these stones. And I think with some people, there's a fear that like you will stack them too high and like
Tower of Babel, perhaps.
Yeah.
Like we can build our way to God.
But you can't.
You cannot.
And then there's freedom in that.
Yes.
About the end of the day, your little stack is like, it's like mine's here and yours is here and the Lord's is like
And I mean, it's
infinite.
also like everything that I have ever learned was created by him.
Right.
You know?
So it's like, what is there to fear in like the classroom of your teacher? Like,
Yeah. That's the question. I mean, what is there truly isn't, there shouldn't be any fear, but I think it's so easy to feel
our
that
pride.
way. It's our
pride that at the end of the day, like, we think we'll outsmart God.
Yeah. And I think it's also when topics are really controversial, it's really easy to think that like, I'm going to say something that's going to make everybody upset. You know, I'm going to upset everyone. And also I think there was a little bit of fear that like my profession or what I do or what I'm passionate about would not fit within the mold of the church, which was something that I had to kind of grapple with. But what's amazing is like, that's not true. You know, like I know I always used to tell people like, you don't have to have a job in ministry to glorify the Lord, you know, but I would never give that grace to myself.
Wow.
And it seriously took until Andy and I were in premarital counseling and the guy that we were talking to, I was telling him about what I do. And he just said, wow, that's amazing. Like we need that here. And I was like, really?
Wow.
And just hearing, it's so beautiful that the Lord has given you that desire for knowledge and that desire for curiosity. That is a beautiful thing. And then we moved on. And normally I get this like, oh, you study biology? Like, do you study the age of the earth? Like stuff like that, where it's like, okay, whoa, I study bacteria, first of all, you know? And it's just, I used to be met with so much skepticism and I was always afraid that people were going to discredit the work that I do, you know, when in reality, I'm also just looking at things. I'm using my senses to make predictions, but hearing for the first time someone really say, we need people like you too. You know, yeah, we need people in ministry. Yeah, we need people doing all kinds of jobs, but we also appreciate you. I was like, oh,
So cute.
I guess I'll just
bacteria time.
I guess I'll go to my PhD. You know, I guess I'll be a doctor.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
I hope that's like, I feel like this conversation can be applied to so many things and to so many different areas. And it's cool because like this one specifically is unique in the fact that I feel like there's just a big spotlight and there's like infinite, like
it's awful. Like, no, it's okay. But like, there's a lot of controversy. I mean, people get really mad.
Yeah.
Like, really mad. I've experienced both sides.
Yeah. And we're just like skimming the surface of it. But I'm sensing like what the overarching picture is that like there is no need to be afraid of a passion that the Lord has put inside of you.
Yeah. And you are not sinning by learning, you know, it's not, I'm not going against God by trying to understand how the world works. Yeah. Which it's like I said, it sounds so ridiculous. Like when I say it like that, you know, like when I say, oh, I'm afraid, you know, I'm going to learn something that's going to make God upset. That sounds crazy. Yeah. But it plays out in a lot of ways, you know, where you notice that you do things and you're like, oh, why am I hesitant to like ask that question? Or why am I hesitant to learn more about that? Or, you know, why am I hesitant to tell people what I do for a living? And it's like, oh, because I'm afraid, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There doesn't need to be any fear in that. But it is scary to like believe that you can live out the passion inside of you in a way that glorifies God if you look around you and you see so many other people living out that passion in a way that doesn't.
Yeah. And that's the thing is so much of the encouragement that I've been given is not from people who do what I do. Like I do not know very many. I mean, if you were to say like, Ashlynn, how many scientists do you know that loudly proclaim the name of Jesus? I don't know. I mean, there are lots of people who, you know, love the Lord and also are scientists. Absolutely. But I don't know if I have specific role models in that area, but rather it's people who are pursuing their passions in other areas, but still have the space, and not only the space, but it's also number one in their life is following the Lord and spending time with Jesus. Those are the people that I've taken so much encouragement from. Like my sociology professor in undergrad, he doesn't study biology, but I took so much inspiration from him and in the way that he was able to observe processes that happen in our society and that happen in our world that are really broken and seek to find solutions. And he still was following the Lord. Maybe not in the way that I am or in the way that everyone is, but in a way that was really encouraging for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Wow. That's awesome. And I hope that's encouraging for you, whoever's
There are
listening.
people.
There are people. Wow.
And your passions are celebrated, especially by the Lord. You know, like, why would we deny that part of ourselves?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good. Okay, Ashy. It's kind of funny. Also, yeah, that's what I call. I just realized I called you with your nickname on this.
That's okay.
Very public podcast.
Girl, it's fine. Is it already time?
Yeah.
Wow.
You
were so right.
Isn't that crazy how fast it goes?
Yeah.
I think it's crazy because like I look at this sign behind us and we just talked about like all of these ways in which you already know where I'm going.
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, there you can stack up all of the stones, you can acquire all of the things, and like you will never fully understand the Lord. And like there's freedom in that.
Yeah.
So it kind of feels like like completing and also like an antidote to everything that we just talked about. But what's something that's too wonderful?
Oh, the question. I've been looking forward to this. Well, I have two.
Okay.
Because I think what we talked about is all too wonderful. So that's kind of like an answer that I can't,
Cop
out. I do think it's too wonderful that every single prophecy that was given about Jesus in the Old Testament came true. That is far too wonderful for me to understand. I've had that answer locked and loaded, Audrey.
Wow. That was like so out of pocket.
I know.
Like,
but it's because I know. I'm sorry I had to go there. Yeah. But over the past like many weeks, I've been like, what is too wonderful for me to know and to understand? And it's that. Because I can't explain that through science.
Wow.
I can't. But the other thing, and that I feel like really comes with what we were talking about, is the idea of like unity within believers. That's something that it's too wonderful for me to understand that someone, well, like in, the book of Acts, when the early church was forming, they stood out and they stood apart because of their unity within believers. And the fact that so many people from so many different walks of life in so many different professions and, classes and, like they could come together and all worship the Lord and all serve each other and all love each other. And if they could do it then, we can do it now, and like it's so wonderful. It's so insane. And the fact that like that's something that we can even experience today in the church is that, people from all different walks of life and in all different careers and who have all different kinds of passions can all come together and worship the same God. And I just think that that's so amazing. And that's something that we as the church take for granted, And
I think it's something we need to pray for more.
Oh, yeah. It's a little timely.
Yeah. I honestly, okay, wait, I've never prayed live on a podcast.
But yes, you have. Oh, like with a video?
Well, no, like
you've totally prayed live.
Really?
Yes. When you did your solo podcast, I'm totally adding you right now.
Oh, I did.
You prayed.
Okay. And guess what? We're going to do it again because we need to pray for unity in the church.
That took a turn, but for a good one.
Yeah. We're almost done, guys. But if you're still listening,
thanks.
Thanks. And also let's pray together. Lord, I've been thinking about unity all day, and Ashlynn talking about it now. We just sit here asking you to unify the body. Lord, would you unify them in a way that makes non-believers startled and makes them wonder and makes them question, like, what can possibly unify them so completely, God? I pray that in all of our differences and all of our different passions and all of the ways that we worship you differently, Lord, that we would just have the same spirit, and that we would love our fellow believers, our brothers and sisters so much better because of it, God, yeah. I just pray for unity, and for whoever's listening right now, Lord, would you make us vessels of, would you make us peacemakers, pursuing righteousness and unity in the church. So yeah, amen.
Amen.
Anyways, that's so good. That's so good. And even those, like, I think even those answers point to like how much you do know about scripture.
Girl, I got a long ways to go.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah, you do. But you also, like, I mean, we didn't even talk about like what a little Jesus.
I brought my whole Bible for oh no, you guys. You guys. Okay, so if you know DC Talk, they're like kind of old school. My mom would know who I'm talking about. If you know Toby Mac.
Oh, yes.
He was like the singer. I used to stretch every morning. Like I used to do the splits every morning to the song Jesus Freak. What would people think? I can't sing that for copyright purposes, but just do a little listen. I've come a long ways. She's still there though.
Also, but yeah, she's still there.
Yeah, and she would be mind blown.
Wow.
That I have given myself the grace and I've given myself the freedom to pursue what I'm passionate about. Because I've liked science since I was like in early middle school.
Praise God.
I looked at pond bacteria under a microscope and I said, I'm going to be a scientist someday.
Wow.
Yeah.
And still a Jesus freak.
And I still love Jesus. You can do it. I promise. Like, that's like what I want to encourage people with, you know, is like, you don't have to give up. Like you don't have to give up your faith, you know?
Yeah.
To follow things that you're passionate about. They will come together, you know, and they can, you know.
That's good. That's so good. Be encouraged, y'all. That was so, why did I just do that?
Be encouraged. It's okay.
It's okay. You know what? Safe place. Anyways,
this is a safe space and there's grace.
There is so much. Okay. Love you all. Thank
Bye,
you for
guys.
listening. See you next week.